This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. At a time when many progressives are quarreling with President Obama's penchant for compromise, a historian reminds us that Franklin D. Roosevelt made unpleasant compromises to achieve larger goals of economic and political freedom. Progressive commentator Catherine Poe comments on political characters and says Michele Bachmann isn't really gone. And Bill Press interviews Congressman Keith Ellison about government snooping. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Columbia University professor Ira Katznelson has a new book out contending that Franklin D. Roosevelt compromised, collaborated if you will, with Southern racists in Congress, but he did so to help establish farther-reaching economic and racial justice. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Ira Katznelson is Columbia University's Ruggles Professor of Political Science and History. Having served as president of the American Political Science Association, he is a member of the Academy of Arts and Sciences and the American Philosophical Society. He is also the author of a well-reviewed new book about the administration of Franklin D. Roosevelt called Fear Itself, the New Deal, and the Origins of Our Time. Professor Katznelson, thanks very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
My pleasure.
Well, we appreciate your time. Your new book about FDR argues that perhaps he wasn't the shining knight of progressivism that Democrats and others think he was. What is the basis of that assessment?
Franklin Roosevelt, like most presidents, had two principal goals. He wanted to solve big problems, and he was faced with immense problems, beginning with the collapse of market capitalism, but also the challenge of the era's dictatorships. And second, he wanted to solve those problems in a way that could get him and fellow Democrats reelected. And in that sense, he was a president like other presidents, though a significantly greater political operator. Franklin Roosevelt was a political genius, and he pursued both those goals intensively. And in so doing, he made many compromises, often necessary compromises, to achieve his goals and to do so in a way that could get him reelected.
Well, and that's what I find surprising, because you reveal that Roosevelt's New Deal programs were able to be passed only because he catered to the political needs of Southern segregationists. Can you explain how that worked?
Well, during this period, the Democratic Party was a hybrid of a combination of strange bedfellows. The non-Southern wing of the Democratic Party was primarily immigrant, urban, Jewish, Catholic, big city machine, pro-labor, oriented toward what broadly might be called social democratic solutions. The Southern wing of the party was overwhelmingly rural, Protestant, non-immigrant, and overwhelmingly white, because African Americans were excluded under the system of Jim Crow from political participation. Southerners were, like Northerners, largely in the Democratic Party, largely oriented toward progressive politics. The South was a poor, dirt-poor region in this period. Only about a third of people who lived on the land in the South had both running water and electricity, according to the 1930 census. But the President of the United States, to pass legislation, had to win a majority, in some cases large majorities, of his party. And that meant that he had to do so, Roosevelt, had to do so, while attending to the wishes, the needs, and the preferences of the southern part of this strange bedfellows coalition.
We're speaking with Ira Katznelson, Columbia University's Ruggles professor of political science and history, also the author of the book Fear Itself, The New Deal and the Origins of Our Time, which is a book about the administration of Franklin D. Roosevelt. So, and you mentioned even when the Southern Democrats, who were populists after all, agreed with FDR's New Deal programs, they made sure to exempt many of the provisions that might help the black community.
Indeed. One of the features I stress in the book Fear Itself is that during the early part of the New Deal, what I call the radical moment spanning 1933 into 1936, the period when the New Deal met the crisis of the Depression by passing the National Industrial Recovery Act, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and control and regulation of Wall Street, and other programs, including the Wagner Act for unionization, the Social Security Act. Throughout this period, nothing could have passed into law had Southern Democrats been united in saying no. And in consequence, the Southerners succeeded in introducing into all these pieces of key legislation exemptions for farm workers and maids in NIRA, in the Wagner Act, in the Social Security Act, and later in 1938 in the Fair Labor Standards Act that created a minimum wage and maximum hours, a 40-hour work week. These occupational exclusions were introduced by Southern Democrats in committee as bills were considered. Why? Because that's what African Americans did in the South in that period. Black women who worked for a wage typically worked as maids in white people's homes, and black men who worked for a wage typically worked on the land. So Southern Democrats who favored the progressive legislation of the early New Deal favored it with the proviso that most African Americans who lived in the South would not gain equal or in some cases any benefit from the legislation.
Now, at a certain point, the Southern Bloc started to break with him and oppose the court-packing plan, legislation to let all soldiers vote, and pro-labor policies. Why did they make that break?
I think the Southerners began to defect from the mainstream proposals of the Democratic Party in the late 1930s and early 1940s for two principal reasons. The first was the growth of a mass labor movement, especially the new Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, that organized auto workers, steel workers, other industrial workers, and which began to organize actively in the American South, as did the AFL. And the growth of mass unionism was seen by white Southerners who defended the Jim Crow system as a very keen threat to their racial order. And that made them deeply nervous, and we can see that the first defections of Southern Democrats came on labor issues that concern the minimum wage, issues that concern the rights of unions to organize. And the second key reason that led to a shift in Southern political behavior in Congress was the Second World War itself, a war that had an ideological thrust that was in part anti-racist in its anti-Nazi focus. Very hard to justify a war for liberal democracy while simultaneously fighting for white supremacy. And yet, that's exactly what Southern Democrats wish to do. Indeed, in the soldier voting legislation, Southerners articulated explicitly the wish to preserve white supremacy. In the words of Senator Eastland of Mississippi, who successfully sponsored a bill in 1944 that effectively kept African Americans and most soldiers overseas from voting, this after D-Day, he said on the floor of the U.S. Senate, "Our boys are fighting for white supremacy." So the Southerners were made nervous both by labor and by the effects of the Second World War. And as defenders of segregation grew more nervous, they tried to erect taller and taller fences, as it were, around the system of Jim Crow in order to defend it from civil rights advocates.
Was Roosevelt's deal with the devil, so to speak, worth it in the long run?
Well, this is, of course, not a simple question to answer, but in the long run, yes, because the various pieces of New Deal legislation that did pass, even with all the hedged conditions introduced by the Southerners, in the long run helped undermine the very presuppositions of racial segregation and white supremacy. And in that sense, the New Deal over the long run did ultimately contribute to the end of the racial system that the Southerners seeked so ardently to defend in the 1940s.
Again, we're speaking with Ira Katznelson, Columbia University's Ruggles Professor of Political Science and History, the author of Fear Itself, The New Deal and the Origins of Our Time, which is a new book about the administration of Franklin D. Roosevelt. What about his alliance with Stalin during World War II? Did Roosevelt get taken by the Soviet leader at Yalta?
Well, the alliance with the Soviets in World War II was an alliance of absolute necessity. If not for the role the Soviet Union played, the Western Allied powers together with the USSR would have lost the Second World War. Imagine the counterfactual situation of the Soviet Union remaining allied with Hitler as it was after the Nazi-Soviet pact. And if Hitler had not invaded the Soviet Union, this would have made life extremely difficult for the Allies. The Soviets bore the brunt of the casualties of the war. So this was an alliance of necessity. Now, after the war, or really as the war was ending, President Roosevelt keenly hoped that the alliance of what was then called the United Nations, the Allies, could sustain a peaceful world afterward. And we should remember that there were three parties at Yalta, Churchill as well as Roosevelt and Stalin. And Churchill, who was deeply anti-Soviet and anti-communist, nonetheless was a realist and understood that a division of Europe was inevitable given where Soviet troops were at the end of the war. So it was a combination of Churchill's realpolitik and Roosevelt's hopes for the future, perhaps somewhat naive hopes for the future, that together produced the Yalta agreements. And at the end of Yalta, not just Roosevelt but also Churchill thought they had scored a big success by getting the Soviet Union to agree to be an active participant in the new organization, the United Nations. I think the Cold War truly started when the Soviets reneged on some of the rhetorical promises they made about free elections in Eastern Europe and especially in Poland. And it was the Polish question that I think began to trigger deep disaffection in the West about Soviet intentions in the post-war years.
And Professor, before we let you go, when FDR came into office, fascism was on the rise around the world, and he himself was no flaming liberal. Given his political penchant for assuming new powers, do you think he was somehow attracted to authoritarianism?
I wouldn't put it quite that way, because Roosevelt was a Democrat and a defender of democracy. But what he and many other friends of democracy worried about when he came to power was the capacity of liberal democracies with a legislature at their center to solve big problems. Just the month before he was inaugurated, Walter Lippmann, America's most important columnist, counseled the need, in his view, to suspend Congress for up to 1 year to give the president executive power to rule in the face of the economic and global emergency. And in his inaugural address, Franklin Roosevelt said, "I will propose many things to Congress, but if they don't pass, I will then ask Congress for the right to rule by executive power." And the great triumph of the New Deal, in my view, is that it never did that. Congress and the separation of powers system remained intact even in the 100 days at the start of the Roosevelt administration. And what the New Deal did demonstrate, all its flaws aside, is that it was capable for a liberal democracy with all its procedural complexities, with all its political polarization, even with its weak sense of public interest as compared to the claims of the dictatorships, that it was possible for such a regime, for such a government, our kind of constitutional government, to solve big problems. And that great achievement is not an endorsement of authoritarianism, but quite the reverse. It strengthened democracy and its possibilities in that period and beyond.
Okay. The name of the book, Fear Itself, The New Deal and the Origins of Our Time. It's a book about the administration of Franklin D. Roosevelt. The author, Ira Katznelson, Columbia University Ruggles Professor of Political Science and History, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Professor, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you so much.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Is Michele Bachmann really gone now that she's announced her retirement? Regular commentator Catherine Poe doesn't think so, and that's coming up in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
It's good to know that our friendly, uber-secret National Security Agency is out there every day protecting our freedom by violating it. A whistleblower has literally blown the lid off NSA's 7-year Super Snoop program of rummaging electronically through about 1 billion phone calls made every day by us average Americans. This revelation even prompted Al Gore to tweet, "Is it just me, or is secret blanket surveillance obscenely outrageous?" It's definitely not just you, Al. This latest explosion of the Fourth Amendment is so mega awful that authorities had to invent a new word for the process: metadata mining. Most shocking, however, is the tin-eared who cares reaction by both Republican and Democratic leaders to this outrageous meta-surveillance of our private lives. For example, GOP Senator Lindsey Graham blustered that it doesn't bother me one bit that NSA has my number. Hey, Lindsey, it's not your number we're worried about. It's NSA's collection of our entire country's numbers. Then came Senator Saxby Chambliss. "We have not had any citizen who has registered a complaint," he blathered. Hello, Senator Clueless? No one knew to complain since y'all kept the program secret from us. And President Obama was even more ridiculous. He tried to rationalize his wholesale invasion of our privacy by declaring that Congress knew about the program, as did a special spy court that routinely reviews and blesses it, so it's all legit. In a perplexed voice, Obama said, "If people don't trust the White House, Congress, and federal judges, then we're going to have some problems here." This is Jim Hightower saying, "Gosh, sir, we the people have now learned that all 3 branches of government have furtively conspired for 7 years to violate our privacy. So, no, we don't trust any of them. And yes, that is a big problem."
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Michele Bachmann, Chris Christie, Hillary Clinton. Our regular commentator Catherine Poe has some sharp insights into all of them. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Catherine Poe writes the ad-lib blog for the Washington Times Communities. She is a former president of Long Island NOW, and she was selected by Progressive Maryland as one of the top progressives in the state, along with Senator Barbara Mikulski and Congresswoman Donna Edwards. And, of course, Catherine is also a frequent contributor to americasdemocrats.org. Catherine, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Jim.
Well, always nice to have you with us again to talk about a little political theater.
Yeah.
So let's head right on to the funniest show on earth. News that Michele Bachmann has had enough of Congress and will not run again. That's actually bad for Democrats, is it not? I mean, the guy who almost beat her last time says he no longer has any interest in the job now that she's toast.
Yeah, right, exactly, and which was a huge surprise and a big disappointment. His name is Jim Graves. He's rather a conservative Democrat. He's a hotel magnate and a businessman. And everybody was sort of shocked because she only beat him by 1 point in a really heavily conservative and Republican district. And Romney actually took that district with 56% of the vote. So Jim Graves should have never come that close. But then all of a sudden he says, no, I'm not going to run, and his reasoning is sort of weird. I mean, we haven't heard a lot out of him, or at least nationally we haven't. But basically, what he was saying was, well, I only ran because I thought she was ineffective and she was an extremist, and that's why I did. But now it doesn't matter. All right, so I'm not going to run. And it was sort of like, what? He actually had a fighting chance no matter what Republican they put up. But no, it was a big surprise to everybody.
And that's also probably the guy that you don't want in there. Then he's probably not the guy you want in there anyway.
No, probably not. He probably been very conservative. I don't think he probably been much different than a Republican. They're going to, he'd been better than Michele Bachmann. But you do begin to wonder because the whole thing is like, wow, he would have had it, and he would definitely probably won the primary. Even he concedes that. So it's sort of strange, Yeah. I don't know we don't really know what's going on, but it's a shame because but we on the left will miss her because she was a gift that kept on giving.
I know Jon Stewart's going to miss her probably more than anybody.
Absolutely. What's he going to do?
Well, the other thing about her too that was very interesting is she raised a ton of money. I mean, she raised unbelievable amounts of money and is very good at it and still only came away with a 1-point victory.
Yes, exactly. And by the way, she already had a war chest for this next run, and she already had ads out in her community,
right,
or in her district, already campaign ads. So this was probably wasn't a big surprise if we really look at what's going on with her, but when you see she's under investigation all over the place. But, she may have just seen the handwriting on the wall.
Well, given the flight of so many conservatives in Congress to foundations or right-wing radio, do you think maybe somebody paid her off to get out of Congress? Deny comedians their day?
Oh, I see. Maybe a Rush Limbaugh came in with some dollars, huh?
Right.
No, I think...
and I of course I say that in jest. Obviously, there.
Oh yes, of course.
There are a lot of things going on with that campaign that obviously were not right.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Everything from her. She's under investigation by the Congressional Ethics Committee. There's allegations of improprieties during the last election, and then also supposedly allegations that she stole, or her campaign stole, the email list of homeschool families, which sort of like throws me completely. Probably weren't that many, were there, that you have to steal a list? I mean, right. But that just didn't make sense to me. But it's that there were so many of these charges, so maybe that and the fact that she barely squeaked through last time around, I don't know. But she's gone. But I have an idea she's not going to be really gone. I mean, unless these things turn out to be so much more serious than we know, and then there's a trial or something. But otherwise, 10 to 1, she's going to end up in some right-wing foundation or something, you know.
Oh, right. Yeah, very more in the tracks of a Sarah Palin and onto Fox News or whatever. So.
Yes, exactly. She's going to end up probably doing something like that.
I doubt that's the last.
Like Fox News got fed up with Sarah Palin, and they'll dump her because, these people really are pretty extreme.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Again, we're speaking with Catherine Poe, who writes the Ad Lib blog for the Washington Times Communities, and, of course, a regular contributor to AmericasDemocrats.org. So what do you make of New Jersey Governor Chris Christie's, the so-called, what everyone loves to call the bromance with President Obama? Right. Which one does it help more?
Well, actually, it helps both a lot. But while it helps Obama in the case of it allowed him to go up there in the midst of all these scandals, and scandals with a quote because they're not really all scandals. But anyway, go up there and, tout the middle class and show what he's doing and how good government can be and how bipartisan he is. But it really helps Christie more. I think in the long run, especially since he's going to be running for governor again, and he's in a heavily leaning Democratic state, that can only help him there. And when looking down, because obviously he's going to run in 2016 for president, I think while it may hurt with some conservatives, I think down the road he's counting on it's not going to hurt him that much. After all, they did nominate Mitt Romney, of course, who's not as moderate as he is, but still, I think he thinks it would help him get Democratic votes. Now, of course, he's going up against Hillary Clinton, but that's, I'm pretty sure that's who he's going up against, but then it becomes a much tougher contest. But I think he thinks otherwise he's got a decent shot, and it helps him to be Obama's buddy. Giving high fives after he did that, throwing that football through the tire.
Yeah, when they were playing it. Yeah, at the Jersey Shore. Yeah, sure. Well,
yeah, right. Does it make him look real? He looks good. He's like one of the guys. So I think he's always had that persona anyway. Yes, and he's also, you don't like it, tough.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of people...
That's what he said to the Republican Party. Is basically, you don't like what I'm saying or doing? Tough. Look what he said after Sandy when Obama came. So I think it only shows the independent streak, which I think a lot of people like and probably a lot of moderate Republicans like.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other thing, too, that I don't understand is here's an opportunity. It's one of the rare opportunities, but more and more rare opportunities for the parties to come together and embrace something, even if it is tragedy or the bounce back from tragedy, and everybody starts nitpicking at it and putting a negative spin to it. And that didn't sit well with me at all. I like the fact that the two got together and were working on a common cause.
Right, exactly. And showing, but for a lot of Republicans, it was like a betrayal, and it's also like, damn, government works,
Right.
So
foils our plan.
It's like...
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, now, apparently there are political aspects to natural disasters elsewhere. We've seen Oklahoma Senator Tom Coburn, whose state was devastated by tornadoes, doesn't think the federal government should help his people. But Governor Mary Fallin seemed grateful for President Obama's attention. How ought this sort of thing work?
It was very interesting because she's been really critical of Obama and everything they did, and he's a big spender and blah, blah, blah. And, man, she just couldn't wait to be standing next to him, and it was a great picture of him grabbing her, I guess it was at the airport tarmac, and sort of giving her like an elbow hug, not like a big chest hug, but an elbow hug.
Right.
And she looking at him adoringly. It was wonderful to see. But it's interesting because Colburn first basically came out and said there has to be offsets. We can't just give money. The states must do it themselves and take care of their own natural disasters. And, of course, he and his Senate colleague, Inhofe, who's also from Oklahoma, voted against the Sandy relief, and we're against that. So they are consistent on this. And also, he had wanted to end FEMA. He has been after trying to get rid of FEMA,
right,
which is sort of interesting. And now, after doing this and getting such bad press on saying, well, it still has to be offset before we can do it, which no other senator is even thinking like that, not even extremely conservative ones, he sort of backtracked and then said, oh, how dare people, people called me up, and this is basically his words, I'm sort of paraphrasing, I got called up by reporters to ask about this before they pulled bodies out of the rubble. And all I could think of is whether they ever found a body or not, or when. That does not explain your mentality,
right.
All of a sudden. And now he's like sort of backtracking and saying, well, we don't have to worry about offsets anyway because there's 5 billion with a B dollars in FEMA, so it's going to be taken care of anyway, so we don't have to have offsets. It's such a typical Republican thing. It's like, we don't want to help you guys over there, but you got to help us when we need it, when we have our hand out. And it just galls me because it happens over and over and over. Sort of like being against gays until you find out you have a gay son. You know, I mean,
yes.
Constantly. As soon as he comes home, then they change their tune.
Yeah.
And
it's just sad that a devastating. Well, it's sad that a devastating situation like these tornadoes or any other natural disaster, whether it's Sandy or whatever it is. Okay, maybe this time. Maybe this time we'll take your money. Yeah, okay. That's
right,
fine.
We'll take your money if it's for us this time. But next time.
Right.
And it's funny because Oklahoma's gotten money before. There had been other tornadoes. Remember Joplin?
Absolutely.
That was Missouri.
But
I forgot. There was another one in Oklahoma, I guess, earlier in this century, and they had gotten money at that time. I mean, I read almost $7 million at that time. So they've taken money in the past, but it's something about that East Coast. You don't give money to the East Coast, I guess.
Well, yeah, people are in trouble, you help them out. That's sort of the backbone of this country, part of it anyway, or it's supposed to be. You mentioned a few moments ago one Hillary Clinton. What's your understanding of the state of Hillary Clinton's presumed campaign for president in 2016? Is this a done deal?
Well, I mean, I think if she wants it, it's a done deal. Mm-hmm. I do. I think, Biden and O'Malley and, all the other people who are in Cuomo will, withdraw. I just don't see them trying to challenge her, especially when you look at any of the kind of poll numbers. And there is more going on behind the scenes with that, too. A few months ago, there was they started the sort of like it's this super PAC called ReadyForHillary.com. Mm-hmm. So that got up and running. And then, I guess about 7 weeks ago, she put up, it's something called HillaryClintonOffice.com. Now, notice it doesn't say HillaryClinton.com. It says office. Now, that could be her office or it could be presidential office, right? I mean, it's sort of an interesting word. And her website, basically, you can leave remarks for her or you can go and see her latest speeches. And they run her speeches and that kind of thing. Ready for Hillary, which is a real pact, has been, doing Facebook and Twitter and getting all kinds of people on board. And then I think it was just this last week, they formed something called the National Finance Council. And right now, it's not so much collecting money, although they have collected money, and they're going to have to, I understand, file for the second quarter. They're going to have to now tell what they have. But, I mean, they haven't been, actively doing it. But who they got to sit on this financial council are some of the biggest donors in the country who have given, particularly the Clinton campaigns in the past and Obama campaigns. And they are, now on the board of directors of this. Now, I can't imagine people doing this without some encouragement, from her. And also, of course, James Carville is out there now, very prominent, talking about her and supposedly serving as an advisor to this council. And I thought I don't think it went anywhere, or anybody saw it, but it's sort of flying under the radar. It's Bill Clinton's White House political director has now joined. His name is Craig Smith. probably not a name a lot of people know, but a very important person in the Clinton White House, and now he's on board with the Ready for Hillary. So, if you watch each month, it just ratchets up a little bit more and a little bit more. Really starting to get. I'll be fascinated to see what kind of money they have raised unofficially, because they aren't out officially raising money that's ready for Hillary, but I understand they've raised quite a bit of money.
You think the unofficial is fascinating? Wait till it becomes official. That's going to be a fascinating number.
I think she's smart to keep her head down because, we already saw with the Benghazi thing how that now someone became a target, although they've now dropped that for now.
Right.
But, why have yourself out there when they've got those long knives out for you already, and, the less you have of that now this early, why put yourself through that? Let other people, be out there and starting to move. So,
absolutely.
Well, I just think it's a technicality. That's all it is.
Sure.
She will run.
Well, and I'm sure this is not the last time we will talk about this. Catherine Poe writes the writes the ad-lib blog for the Washington Times Communities, frequent contributor here to americasdemocrats.org. Catherine, as always, thank you so much for your time with us. We appreciate it, and we will talk to you again soon.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim.
All right. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Minnesota Congressman Keith Ellison.
Congressman, let's start talking about NSA. The president last Friday said that every single member of Congress was informed and knew about the NSA phone tapping program. Not phone tapping, but phone record collection program. Did you?
No, and I let me just help folks understand this situation. So people who were on the Intelligence Committee probably were informed. Yeah. They're not denying that. Every other member of Congress, we're looking for the notice that we were supposedly ever given that they were collecting the 200 million phone records. And, we have no such notice in our office as that. I haven't run into anybody who said, oh, yeah, I knew. Interestingly enough, as this story has unfolded after the fact, I've had some people say that there were stories in the press that alluded to this. But I can tell you that this is generally not known. And folks are a little shocked that this is going on. I mean, there's outrage. And so I think that if they did anything, and again, I'm on a limb saying this even, they might have said there's a document you might want to look at. It's in some room halfway across the Capitol. Take 2 hours, no staff, no phones, no notes, no nothing. Oh, and by the way, we can't even tell you what it is, but it's there.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing, and you
might have happened,
right? Maybe,
right?
And you've been on the Hill, so if folks want to say they gave you notice but don't really want to give you any, that is so easy to do.
Yeah.
Because everybody there is calendar's full, right? And so unless you know to prioritize something, there's no way you're going to be able to, because you got too many other things to do otherwise. And
I read in the Hill yesterday where the former heads of the Intelligence Committee, Jane Harman and Pete Hoekstra, both of them also said that just because, let's say, a Keith Ellison asked, oh, can I see that? Let's say you were not informed, but you heard a level of rumblings, and you called and said, I'd like to take a look at this. That doesn't mean you would get access.
Oh, absolutely. Well, here's another thing. If anybody who claims that Congress knew, which it didn't, Congress, select members knew, but Congress as a group didn't know, then just review what Mr. Clapper had to say. I mean, are there any large-scale collection of Americans' telephone numbers and information?
No, he said. Yeah.
And then they said, oh, well, he had to lie because, he just, I don't know. I don't know why you ever have to lie. I mean, the guy could have said, this is an unclassified briefing. You asked me a classified question. can't answer that. So then would we have been like, ooh, what's all behind that? Yeah, we would. But at the end of the day, he would have been able to not mislead the U.S. Congress. I mean, they want to say on the one hand we knew, but then when the question is directly asked, that somebody in the administration doesn't tell the truth.
So you didn't know about the program. Now that you do know about the program, what do you think of what we know? Do you think it's
shocking,
necessary, and to keep us safe?
No, I don't. As a matter of fact, the way that we find terrorist threats, criminal threats, is you do sort of keep you have human intelligence, you have your eyes, your ears open, you have relationships that you've built, you hear about things, you get tips here and you get tips there, and you follow them up. Right, and you do need to follow those tips up. You do need to ask questions.
Right,
like this guy Omar Abu Muttalib, the underwear bomber. His father called the embassy and said, "My son is radicalizing and dangerous." Everybody knows we had certain reason to believe that Mr. Tsarnaev should have been looked into a little more. I mean, there's human intelligence out there. It's there, and so there's this whole analogy of, well, if your terrorists are needles in a haystack, so therefore we need to go get the whole haystack to find the needles.
That's the argument. That's the argument.
So my thought is, well, wait a minute. Are we looking for a haystack or are we looking for needles? Look for the needles. Look for those things that tip you off as to where the trouble spots are. And then after they get all this data, they want to keep it for a long time, like 5 years. They don't even get rid of it. So that they don't have it anymore, so people don't. I mean, I think it's outrageous for Americans to know that the government can just, look at the duration of your calls, who you called, who they, I just think, who have nothing to do with any wrongdoing. I just think it's a problem, and I hope that people don't just sweep this one under the rug, because I think there's some good reforms that we can do now.
What does it tell you that 76% of Americans in the latest poll say, yeah, okay, we don't have no problem with this?
Well, what it tells me is that people think that, look, I'm not doing anything, so it's not going to affect me. But it can affect you. It still can affect you in many important ways. And I think that what we should do is also remind everybody that the Bill of Rights is not really sort of a majority win sort of instrument, right? Mm-hmm. The Bill of Rights is about individual rights, right? It's not about the whole group. It's about the individual person.
Right.
And if we were to vote on the Bill of Rights, would it pass? I don't know. If somebody said that you have the right to practice any religion you want to, if somebody said you can say what you want, criticize a government official, if somebody said you can, if somebody said you can, the government has to have a reason before they go searching and seizing your stuff, maybe folks would say, no, we don't want that. Yeah. I'm sure the lobby there'd be plenty of lobbyists who didn't want it. But
yeah, there would certainly be qualifiers. So two things. Edward Snowden, did he do the right thing?
You know what? I'll put it like this with regard to Edward Snowden. I cannot say that when you violate the law, there's not going to be any consequences to that. Edward Snowden knew that what he did was going to bring him law enforcement attention. Best I can say for Edward Snowden is that he should have the right to a quality lawyer and have every protection. He should not be punished more than the law calls for, and that's what I can say. But I'll say this: there have been people in the course of American history who have done the right thing, right moral thing, but in violation of the law. In those cases, you still have to deal with the law, right?
Right.
Now,
right.
if he thinks that what he did was legally justified, there may be a legal defense that he can mount, right? But I don't think you just ignore this.
Now, one of your colleagues, Peter King, has said we should not only prosecute Edward Snowden, we should prosecute Glenn Greenwald, who's the reporter who got the story and broke the story.
That's ridiculous. Of course, look, the Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of the press, right? I mean, the American people have a right to know, And so often, I mean, the people who wrote the Constitution knew that there was a tendency within human beings to feel that they know what's best for others, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so we set it up. So that people would have individual rights. We set up checks and balances between the executive branch, the legislative branch, judicial branch, because the basic presumption of the Constitution is that you can't really trust anyone with all the power. So he made it so that everybody has a way to check everybody else. Once you break that down, start prosecuting journalists for printing stories, I mean, now you're in rough terrain. Now you're treading upon people's basic right to know.
Next thing, they're going to prosecute the people who read the story.
Right. Why stop with the journalists who wrote the story?
Yeah. If you
all
follow
the people who read it,
Peter King's logic.
Yeah.
Congressman Keith Ellison from Minnesota here in the studio with us. We're glad to take your calls at 866-55-PRESS. We'll be right back.
This is the Bill Press Show.
Hey, here we go. 26 minutes after the hour, we're going to switch and talk energy in the next half hour. Right now, we're on the news of the day, particularly the NSA, with Congressman Keith Ellison here from Minnesota. Peter, quick story?
Quick story, because I wanted to get this and say hello to Philip Tuttle. Philip Tuttle is a lobster man in Maine. He's 90 years old, and when the rainstorms that came through Maine from Tropical Storm Andrea came through, it sunk his ship. And as the saying goes, a captain goes down with the ship. Not Philip Tuttle, not 90-year-old Philip Tuttle. He went into the water, icy cold. He swam to a nearby island and was there until he was found. He was found safe. He's okay. He's got some injuries that they're working on, but he's 90. He said, it's not my time to go.
Yeah, he said it was not his time, so he was not going to go down with the ship. Unfortunately, Congressman, it was time for one of your top aides that we got to know very, very well when you first started, got to Congress and came in the studio here, Rick Jowett.
Rick Jowett, awesome guy. You know, he started out working for Rick Noland, who and Rick was this. Rick passed away at the age of 59, and Rick Noland, who's back in Congress, is now about 69, 70. And so Rick was like the younger guy helping out the candidate. And when he ended his career, he was like about 12, 13 years older than I am. So he's sort of like
the older
was my
guy
mentor.
The younger
right.
guy. Yeah.
So Rick has spanned all of the Minnesota delegation. He has alternatively worked to help support Rick Noland of the Duluth Brainerd area, Betty McCullum of St. Paul, Bruce Vento, who died of cancer, and including Jerry Sikorsky. And so he's helped all of us along the way and did a lot of good, helped a lot of interns along the way. A lot of young people know a lot about how to be effective on the Hill because of Rick Jowett. So we said goodbye to Rick last Saturday in Laverne, Minnesota, which is a town very proud of Rick, and he'll be missed, and he already is.
We remember him well. And Congressman, thank you so much for all you're doing and for coming in today.
All right now. Take care.
Buddy.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Ira Katznelson, Catherine Poe, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to